This conference will now
like
be recorded.
logged in, so I know who your names are, and I can provide you the credit for tonight. Just for your information, we are providing online CE classes throughout the month of May and into June. We have 2 classes that Jason Van Ostel has recorded thus far. Well, actually, the second one will be tomorrow. And then we will be recording those, and then your members of your organization, if you want, they can log in and listen to those as a video webinar type situation. Those are in 2-hour increments, and we have some other classes available as well. We are also looking forward to our golf tournament. We feel like this will be an opportunity to get out and meet people and be an opportunity for us to be able to enjoy each other's company and networking and so forth. That will be on August the 5th, and you've been receiving information about that so far as well. Well, let's go ahead and get started. There are a couple of people that have joined us, caller 2 and caller 3. If you could send me your name and license number, that way I can make sure to give you credit. So, would like to welcome Dana Farmer. Dana is a great resource for our association. He's been a part of the UPHCA sensitive protection and has provided us great classes as well as counsel and direction. And we'll just turn it over to you, Dana, and thank you very much for doing this tonight.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to help out. What I'm going to do is I've got a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to send that to Dave. And then I've also got this Excel spreadsheet that you see on the screen in front of you right now. They both talk about the same thing. This one has some charts and graphs and stuff like that on it, so I'm going to use it for the presentation, whereas the PowerPoint is mostly just, well, in fact, it's exclusively just words. And so Dave can send that out to everybody, so you've got copies of those and you can look at them and reference back and forth and be able to have some materials to use as a reference after tonight's presentation.
I'll take care of that then. Thank you, Dana.
Yeah, no problem. So what you see on the screen in front of you right now is a chart that sort of lays out Utah lien and bond law for private projects, state and local projects, and then federal projects within Utah. And so as I go through and discuss this tonight, you're going to see that there are different notices that you do at different times, and that there's distinctions between some of the different notices and when deadlines start and when they stop and things of that nature. So,
Dana, let me just interrupt you for just a second. If you want your screen to be larger so you can see, just over on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a plus and minus that will enlarge your screen, and so you can be able to see in more detail if you want. Sorry about that, Dana.
No problem. So what I did here is I moved over to this 2090-180 tab. So to try and simplify things, I'm going to start here and I'm going to end here, because 2090 and 180 represent 3 deadlines that if you focus on those and work based on those deadlines, then everything will fit. And so the 20 comes from the SCR deadline. This is your deadline to pre-lien a job. You've got 20 days from your first day of work. So that's what this first means, is your first day of work. You have 20 days to pre-lien a project. If you pre-lien the project within your 20 days, then you've got lien rights. and bond rights, where bond rights apply for the entire project, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. So that's the first number that you need to remember, is that 20 days from your first work, you need to pre-lien if you want to be able to have the lien rights and bond rights. Then the second set of deadlines are down here, the 90 and the 180. Now we're talking about, instead of at the beginning of the job, we've moved to the end of the job. So the 90 represents 90 days after your last work, and that is when you should do your bond claim or your lien claim. And so this first right here, we're talking about bonds and pre-construction liens. The deadline to file those is 90 days after your last work. But if you've got, and pre-construction liens, by the way, apply to design work, which I'll talk about briefly. But then for any work that's going on the project site, that's construction liens. And that's not based on your last date of work, like bonds and design related stuff. Instead, that's based upon when the whole project is done. This phrase, final completion of the original contract, which means certificate of occupancy or final inspection and so forth. And so the actual lien deadline is going to start to count down in most instances sometime later than when you actually finish the work. But if instead of, this can get kind of complicated, as you'll see. So if you just lock in your mind that you need to make your lien claim, or if you have bond rights, you need to make a bond claim within 90 days of your last work, then that will keep you, by focusing on your last work, that will keep you within the potential deadlines that could apply for these liens down here. And then finally, once you file a lien, it's only good for 180 days, and then it has to be foreclosed, which means that you have to file a lawsuit seeking an order selling the property. And so for bond rights, you've got a year from your last work before you file your lawsuit. So on a bonded job, you make your claim within 90 days of last work, and then you've got 1 year from your last work to file your lawsuit. But with a lien, once you file the lien, then that starts the countdown towards the deadline for the lawsuit, which is 180 days after the lien is filed. So this green line is the lien filing, then we have 180 days, and then we have the deadline for the lien lawsuit. So that's the third number. If you file your lawsuits, depending upon whether it makes sense to do it, but if you file a lawsuit within 180 days after you make your claim, then you'll be within your lien deadline, because that's 180 days after your lien, and you'll be well within your bond deadline. And sometimes you do have bond rights and lien rights on the same job. But if you keep those three deadlines in mind, then that simplifies everything that I'm going to talk about tonight. So I'll come back to this at the end after I go through the other stuff. But what I want to let you know up front is that as we go through it, if you're thinking to yourself, how am I going to keep all this stuff straight? Well, I'm trying to help you out by giving you this 20, within 20 days of first work, you pre-lien. Within 90 days of last work, you make your lien and bond claims. And then within 180 days after your claim, you file lawsuits if that becomes necessary. You keep those three things in mind, you follow those three basic rules, and you'll be, as far as deadlines go, you will comply with everything that we talk about tonight for deadlines. So going back to this first page, which I just have labeled as on this worksheet tab, what I'm going to talk about now is, I'll kind of show you a picture of this. I'll blow it up and I'll work my way down through it. So over here on the left, we start with private projects, and then we move to public projects. Public projects are divided into two types: state and local, and then federal. So I'm going to talk about each of these in order. On private projects, so this means property that is not owned by the federal, state, or local governments. As I just talked about, you've got a 20-day deadline to file your pre-lien in the state construction registry. So this gray shaded area, the reason that I put these squares in gray is that these are the types of rights. These are lien rights and bond rights on private projects, and then bond rights on state and local projects, where if you want to be able to make a claim on the bond here in these two rows, or if you want to have lien rights, which is what we discuss here in this row, then in order to have those rights, you must file your pre-lien in the state construction registry within 20 days of your first day to work. So that's why I've got these in gray. And so you just file it once, you do it within 20 days, and you're good to go. Now, one of the unique things about Utah is that we divide our lien rights into two groups: construction and pre-construction. Pre-construction is design. Construction is on the job. So this is what's going on someone's CAD machine or some architect, engineer, stuff like that. That's pre-construction. So that means that you're only going to do design work. So architects, engineers, surveyors, anybody who's just doing design and not doing anything as far as the build goes, then if they want to be able to lien a job, they have to use pre-construction lien rights. Now I realize that sometimes you guys get into situations where there's a design element to what you're doing. That does not bring you into this world of pre-construction rights, okay? It's still construction, because no matter what amount of design you do, if you're selecting particular types of materials, or if you're choosing shower surrounds or what have you, if you have to subcontract a mechanical engineer to do design on the plumbing or mechanical system in any way, even though you've got a design element to your contract in any of those varying degrees, the fact is that you're doing the work on the job. You're not purely designing. And so your engineer is going to be down here, but you are going to follow construction because you're getting dirt under your fingernails and you're out there doing the actual work. So I just want to make that clear so that you don't get confused and think, well, if I have any design aspects I've got to do, I got to follow both of these. You don't. You just do this first one up here, which is construction, and don't worry about this. This is for the people who are purely working off their computers and their drafting tables. All right. The other thing that makes Utah unique is that we're one of a handful of states that requires payment bonds. So these are insurance companies that guarantee payment to unpaid subs and suppliers. There's about a half a dozen states that have that. Utah is one of them. And so it's common to have payment bonds on publicly owned projects, but it's very rare to see that requirement on privately owned projects. But Utah's got it. Now, it doesn't cover every project in the state of Utah. There are some limitations. Liens apply to every project, every privately owned job where you're furnishing, equipment, labor, material, or services. There are lien rights. But for bond rights, the prime contract has to be over $50,000, and the project cannot be a single family dwelling or multifamily housing up to a fourplex. So what that means is this: for every construction project, actually, before I say that, let me step down for a minute and go right here. You'll notice that the 50,000 requirement also applies on publicly owned projects, which means state, county, city, school district, and special improvement districts. So you've got this $50,000 prime contract requirement. So as far as bond rights go in the state of Utah, for every construction project in the state of Utah where the prime contract is more than $50,000 and the project is not a single family dwelling or multifamily up to a fourplex, the owner is required to have the general contractor bond the job. And if there is no bond, then guess what? You can sue the owner. All unpaid subs and suppliers are treated as though they had a contract with the owner. By law, you have the ability to file a lawsuit directly with the property owner, directly against the property owner. And if it's privately owned, you also have lien rights. You can foreclose a lien in the same lawsuit. If it's publicly owned, you don't have lien rights, but if you've got a prime contract over 50, you can sue the state of Utah. You can sue the county if it's a county-owned project, cities, school districts, special improvement districts. Okay, these are things like fire districts, sewer districts, geographical areas that have a service and the service is paid for based upon property tax assessments. That's a special district. You can directly go after them if there is no bond. So that is very helpful. If we come down here to federal, so if something's federally owned, Hill Air Force Base, national parks, BLM, you know, the various federal buildings downtown, like the FBI building, the main government building on State Street, anything that the federal government owns. Here, if the prime contract is over $100,000, then there must be a payment bond. So that policy must be in place to guarantee payment to unpaid subs and suppliers. But there's a catch. On federal projects, that does not apply with these state and local projects here or up here on the private bond requirements. And that is that bond rights on these federally owned jobs are limited to first and second tier subs and suppliers. So what that means is this. If you have a contract with the general contractor, then you can make a claim on the bond. If you have a contract with a first tier sub, so that you're a second tier subcontractor or supplier, then you can make a claim on the bond. But if there are two or more people between you and the general contractor, you don't have bond rights on a federal job. Now, sometimes first and second tier subs or suppliers will be required to get bonds. And so if you're third or fourth tier, you can make a claim on those bonds. But as far as the bond that the general contractor has to get under federal law, which is called the Miller Act, if you've ever heard of that, if you want to be able to make a claim on the general's bond, you have to have a contract with the general, so you're first tier, or you have to have a contract with somebody who has a contract with the general. So if you're bidding or if you're going to do work on a federal job, you need to know where you stand within these tiers so that you know whether or not you've got the ability to make a bond claim. Now, if you're third or fourth tier, you may not have bond rights, but none of this stuff changes the fact that you've got contracts. So the bond and the lien rights, that just creates another pocket to get some money out of. But if you ignore everything I tell you tonight on lien deadlines and bond deadlines, you haven't lost your contract rights. You haven't lost the fact that the person who has signed the contract with you or who has hired you still has to pay you on the contract. This is just collateral. This is just security for your contract. All right. So we've got our 20-day requirement. Within 20 days of your first work, you file in the state construction registry, you pre-lien the job, and that applies with private property and it applies to state and local bonds, but it doesn't apply on federal jobs. You don't have to pre-lien federal jobs. Now, a lot of the general contractors in the state and a lot of the subcontractors in the state are still filing in the state construction registry on federal jobs that are on the base and other stuff like that. You can go ahead and do it. And if somebody asks you to do it, it's only like $1.50, so just go ahead and do it. But if you don't, or if you don't do it on time or whatever, don't worry about it because it's really not required. So if the general's using the state construction registry on a federal project and they're tracking all their subs and suppliers, go ahead and file on there. If it could help you get paid sooner, but you're not going to get dinged if you don't file. Okay. Now, one other thing I want to show you while we're on this first stuff is that I put this first asterisk here and I put 2 on this one. So if we go way down here, then this is the definition of construction work from the Utah Code for liens, and this is pre-construction. So you can see the definitions down here if you want to read this stuff, but simply put, construction is on the ground and pre-construction is on the computer or on the drafting table. Design versus the actual work. Okay, now this 20 days. So I've mentioned to you, I'm going to go back over to this 2090-180. When I was showing you this at the start of the class, I talked about the fact that you need to file your pre-liens within 20 days of your first work. That's the law. If you file by your 20th day, then you've got lien rights and bond rights as applicable for all of the work that you do from day 1 all the way through to the end. But there is an exception. So now I'm on this tab right here that's called the 20-day rule. So what this tab depicts is 3 different contractors or subcontractors or suppliers. It really doesn't matter which. But we've got 3 folks here who are all working on the same construction project. And this represents when the pre-lien is filed. So for A, it's 15 days before A's first work. And then contractor B starts the same day as A does, but doesn't file the pre-lien until 15 days after B's first work. And then C actually also starts the same day, but C doesn't pre-lien the job until 45 days after C's first work. So then the question is, well, who has lien rights and bond rights and who doesn't? Because we've got 2 people who filed before the 20-day deadline, which is this line right here that has the 20 at the top. And then we have 1 contractor C who filed after the deadline. So remember, the rule is that if you file by the 20th day after your first work, then you have rights from day 1 till the end. So even though A filed before starting work, that's okay. The law doesn't prohibit that. And 15 days before first work is definitely before 20 days after. And so A has filed before the 20-day deadline, which means that A has lien rights and where applicable bond rights from A's first work all the way through to A's last work. Now we go to B. B started work the same day as A, but it wasn't until 15 days after B's first work that a pre-lien got filed in the state construction registry. But 15 days after first work is still before 20 days from first work. So B has also filed before the 20-day deadline, which means that B has lien rights and bond rights from B's first work all the way through until the last work. Now we come down to the sad case of contractor C. Contractor C starts work the same day, but C didn't pre-lien before starting work. C didn't pre-lien in the first 20 days after starting work. In fact, it was 25 more days. It wasn't until 45 days, right here on this dotted line, after C's first work that C finally filed a pre-lien in the registry. Now that doesn't mean that C's completely blown it and has no lien rights or no bond rights. What it means is that C does not have any lien rights or bond rights for the first 45 days from first work until the date of filing, or for the next 5 days after C filed. So C's lien rights and bond rights begin or apply to the work that C does starting on C's 50th day. So if C gets paid for all of this work and then does some work down here towards the end and is chasing these last dollars but gets paid for the first dollars, then C will be able to use lien rights and bond rights in addition to the contract to collect this. But if all of C's work was done in the first 50 days, then C's got a contract that it can enforce, but no lien rights or bond rights to act as security or as collateral for those contract rights. So that's the 20-day rule. As long as you meet the 20 days, whether you file before you start work or after, as long as you meet those 20 days, then you're good to go. You're completely covered with lien rights and bond rights. But if you file later, your rights don't pick up until 5 days after you file. So that's why it's critical. That's why I've got, going back over to the 2090-180 tab, that's why I've given you this first number, which is 20. File within 20 days of your first work. If you do, then as you can see, you're good to go. You're in the position of A and B. All right, so I'm going to go back to the worksheet now, and we'll talk about the next thing that happens here. The first thing that I want to emphasize is that as you look at our next column, which is lien and bond notices, you'll see that pre-construction liens have to be filed within 90 days of your last work. Private bond notices, private bond claims and notices have to be filed within 90 days of your last work. State and local bond claims, 90 days after your last work. Federal bond claims are due within 90 days of your last work. So every type of a claim that you can file on a construction project in Utah has to be filed within 90 days of your last work, except construction liens. So since 90 days from last work is the most restrictive and the most common claim deadline, then going back over here to 2090-180, that's why I've got 90 days from your last work right here as the key to remember for making your claims, for filing your lien and bond claims, because that's the most restrictive and the most common deadline that you're going to deal with. And it will keep you within the more complicated deadline, which is the deadline for construction liens. The construction lien deadline, which is all this stuff above this line right here, the basic deadline is that lien claims must be filed within 180 days after final completion of the original contract. Well, what does that mean? It means these three things. First, it means a final certificate of occupancy if there will be a final certificate of occupancy. If not, then it means that the 180 days after the final inspection. And if you're not going to have a final certificate of occupancy or a final inspection, it means that the lien deadline is 180 days after substantial completion, which is basically the owner's first punch list. Unless, so then we've got an exception to the 180-day rule, which is unless a notice of completion is filed. Well, a notice of completion is a notice that generals and owners and banks can file in the registry. And if they file that, it takes time off this 180 days, and all liens are due within 90 days after the notice of completion. So your base deadline for construction liens is this 180 days after whichever one of these three items will control, unless a notice of completion is filed. And you'll know because if you filed your pre-lien, it will get emailed to you. And if you receive an email with a notice of completion from the SCR, you've got 90 days to file your lien. And even if that happens, that deadline for those notices is going to start after you're done with your work. And so going back to our 2090-180, even if here, so in this example, let's assume that you have final completion of the original contract and a notice of completion gets filed. Well, so that's what this 90 represents, is a notice of completion. And so that reduces this 180 days here. But that's still going to be longer than 90 days after your last work. So for simplification, instead of having to sit down because you're not getting paid and say, okay, I took that class that UPHCA had that Dana talked about, so let's see here. is there going to be a final certificate, final inspection? So instead of walking through this whole process right up here, just remember 90 days after your last work. If you're within 90 days after your last work, then you're covered on your bond rights, and you're going to be covered on construction lien rights and all that stuff. So that is my effort to try and show you that you may have some room up here to work with. But as far as not trying to turn everybody into amateur attorneys and giving you a rule of thumb you can work with, go with 90 days after your last work. And that will cover you on your lien and bond notice deadlines for filing those claims. All right. So now the next deadline that we have to deal with is filing lawsuits, because lien rights and bond rights don't exist forever. And the shortest deadline that we have for filing a lawsuit to enforce lien rights or bond rights is up here with liens. So the last number that I told you to remember from 90 days after your last work is all of these things. Now we're going to use the lien deadline. The 180 is the last number to remember, because lien lawsuits are due quicker than bond lawsuits. So lien lawsuits have to be filed 180 days after this notice right here, whether it's the pre-con notice or the construction notice, or even if you filed both. Once you file your notice, your lien rights will expire in 180 days unless you file a lawsuit to enforce it. Whereas for bond rights on private projects, bond rights on public projects, state and local bonds, and even bond rights on federal projects, it's 1 year after your last work. But going back to this 2090-180 tab, that faster deadline on liens will come faster than the deadline, sooner than the deadline for bond rights. So if you remember, lawsuits are due within 180 days after claims are filed, then you'll be able to make sure that you're covering your lien deadline and also any bond deadlines that could apply on a given construction project. So this is our base deadline that we use for filing lawsuits. Now, just because you've made a lien claim or a bond claim doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get paid. Those rights exist, but they're not absolute. The other thing is that just because you file a lawsuit to enforce lien rights through a process that we call judicial foreclosure, which is where the court can order a sale of the property and you get paid from the sale, or because you file a lawsuit to enforce your bond rights, which means that if you're successful, the court will order the bond company, also known as a surety. So if I say surety, I'm talking about a bond company. Just because you do that, just because you file the lawsuit, doesn't mean that you're going to win. There are many different ways that people will try to keep you from being able to collect the money that you're claiming. Whether it's disagreements over scheduling, change orders, defects, delays, all those types of things. And that could add up to costing a lot of money. So before you dive into a lawsuit, or even if you make the decision to file a lawsuit, you need to sit down and spend some time and figure out if you're going to be throwing good money after bad. So you decide, all right, I'm already out whatever money I'm owed here. How much more money will I have to spend to collect the money that I'm already owed? And if it's throwing good money after bad, then as much as it may hurt, it can be a better decision to not file a lawsuit and go after it. I can tell you that the most expensive lien enforcement lawsuit that I've ever been involved with started in 2015. My client has spent over $1 million in attorney fees. The case is on appeal right now. And we're not even going to be in front of the court to argue that until sometime this fall. We won't have a decision until sometime next summer. And if we're successful with that appeal, it goes back to trial again. That was almost a 6-week trial, and that trial is not going to start until probably January or February of 2022. So you want to be careful. Now, that doesn't mean that every lawsuit costs that much money, but the problem is the more money you spend on a lawsuit, the more that you become invested in it, and the harder it becomes to resolve it. So you just have to be very careful in making decisions about lawsuits, because it becomes very unpredictable and very expensive. And owners and general contractors will do all sorts of things to try and stop you from being able to get that money. So keep that in mind, and make sure that you make an advised decision before you file a lawsuit. All right, so these are the base deadlines and the fundamental things that you have to understand in order to be able to obtain lien rights, which is what you do through filing in the state construction registry, and then your enforcement process, so making your claims and going through and enforcing your rights. The place that you're going to interact with lien rights the most is in the state construction registry, where you file your pre-liens. And so there are 2 ways to handle that. One is that within your business, you have 1 or more people who are able to understand how to use the state construction registry in order to be able to file pre-liens. The other one would be that you outsource that to somebody to do it for you. And it's up to you to decide which makes sense for your business. But if you want to be able to use the rights that are given to you, that we're talking about here, you've got to be able, you have to have some business policy for how you're going to comply with the requirements of the state construction registry. Because if you don't file the notices here, then none of this stuff matters. If you can't comply with this original 20-day filing requirement, then you don't have any rights to make the lien and bond claims or to file these lawsuits. This wipes you out right here. So one of the things that comes up quite a bit when I teach these classes to contractors as opposed to suppliers, and especially to plumbers and electricians and so forth, is I get the question, do I have to file this for every water heater I put in? You know, it's a service related question. So on service work, do I have to do this? And the answer, like all answers from lawyers, is it depends. And here's what it depends on. If you want to have these lien rights to be able to get paid for the water heater that you replace, then yeah, you got to file in the state construction registry. But there is an easier way to address the service work that you do if you do service work within your business. And that is this. Since service work much more often than not means that you're dealing directly with the property owner, as long as the work that you're doing for the property owner is less than $11,000, which is the maximum amount that you can get in small claims court, then what you can do is you can ignore the stuff that we're talking about here, and just go and do the work for the owner. Try to get as much as you can up front. I know some people have like 50% upfront policies, and it varies from business to business, but whatever you do on credit, as long as the amount of credit you extend is less than $11,000, if that owner doesn't pay you, you can take them to small claims court. And in small claims court, if you're successful, you'll get a judgment against them. And once you have a judgment, then you can turn that judgment into what's called a judgment lien. And with a judgment lien, you have the ability to be able to sell the property you did the work on, or any other property that that person owns. So if they've got a house where you did the work, but they also have a cabin someplace within the state of Utah, then you can go and you can move your lien onto their cabin. You can also garnish their accounts and do all the other stuff that judgments allow you to do. So if you do enough service work in your business that you would rather not have to file in the state construction registry every time you go out and do service work, then you can just take what we've been talking about so far and apply this and use this stuff, follow these rules when you're a subcontractor, when you're not working directly for the property owner. Because in that situation, if you're not working directly for the property owner, you can't get a judgment against the owner. So you would want to use this. So as a matter of business policy, if you want to divide your service work between your other work where you're not dealing directly with the property owner, then that service work, your policy there can be, as long as we're under $11,000, we're not going to worry about filing in the state construction registry. If we run into a problem, we'll use small claims court, and we have all of the collection opportunities that small claims court gives us, and we'll just we'll go that way and save ourselves the hassle of having to just file a whole bunch of claims in the Utah State Construction Registry. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, if it works here, I'm going to drag my, let's see. Okay, so what I've put up in front of you now is the web page for the Utah State Courts. So this is utcourts.gov, or I'll go back one more step, and I just Googled Utah State Courts, and then I clicked on the court's website here. And if you come down here, it says small claims. And so over here on the small claims page, and there are several pages within this, it gives you a whole bunch of information on small claims court. And down at the bottom, it gives you forms that you can use and tells you about filling out these forms and how to be able to use small claims court to your benefit. So you have all of the forms here on this main page. And then also you've got this page that talks about collecting the judgment. So you've got, if you were to scroll up through here, there's a bunch of discussions about filing in small claims court, how to file, preparing for trial, appealing a decision. Well, once you get a judgment, then you're down here to collecting the judgment. And so in each of these pages, you've got these links, and they take you to additional information and additional forms. But if you get the judgment, then you come over here to how to collect the judgment page, and it has a whole bunch of explanations. And here it discusses a judgment lien, which is what I was just talking about. This is what we know. There's, how do you know what they own? Well, you can require them to come to court and tell you, and that's what you'll get explained to you here. And then you have these writs, which are orders to the sheriff to go and seize things or sell things. And then several other things. But if you come down here to the bottom, then they'll give you forms, if you follow these different links, to be able to use to go and to get the writs or to create the judgment lien or to do those different things that are explained in here. And so there's a lot of really good information here to help you understand what to do and how to go through the process of collecting on a small claims judgment and using that process to be able to get your money. The nice thing about small claims court is this: under regular court rules, which means the rules of the district court, which is where all lawsuits are filed in the state of Utah, if your business is a corporation or a limited liability company, which most of you are, then you have to be represented by a licensed attorney in district court. The other thing is that to foreclose a lien, so to go through all the stuff that we talked about, to foreclose a lien that, that deals with the 2090, 180 stuff, you can't do that in small claims court. Those types of liens can only be, those lawsuits for those liens and those bond claims can only be filed in district court. And so you have to hire an attorney and you have to be represented by an attorney in district court. But in small claims court, corporations and LLCs, limited liability companies, can represent themselves. So even though the small claims court doesn't have the authority to foreclose a construction lien or a pre-construction lien, it does have the authority to enforce contracts and to give you a judgment for a specific amount. It just doesn't have the authority to order a sale of somebody's property. And so you or one of your employees can go to small claims court and can take all of the information on this website and be able to use it to collect on those amounts that fit within the limits of the small claims court. So this becomes an efficient process to be able to use for collection in the service context, because it's cheaper, it's faster, and it can get you to where you want to be much more economically than hiring a licensed attorney and going to district court. So Dave, we've still got a little bit of time. If people have questions, I'm happy to answer questions if you want to do that.
Dana, you've got a couple of questions on the chat from Chris Wayman.
Let me see if I can find chat.
Top right hand.
I got it. All right. Let's see here. If the project is not complete, but the GC or the owner is not paying progress draws, can you file on the bond or lien without your work being completed? Yeah. You don't have to wait until you're done to make a lien claim. You just have that. Ultimately, you've got that 180-day deadline once you are done, or once that time period runs. It's not real common to file a lien before you finish work, but it comes up a few times a year, and I have had clients do that. The first question I always ask is, are you sure you want to keep going? And usually it's that you're close to the end, and so people want to go ahead and finish out. But yeah, you can file before you're done. The next question is, if you filed an SCR when you start the project under the GC's SCR and the GC is terminated from the job, do you have to file a new SCR under the new GC? The law is that you have to file in the SCR for every original contract, which is the same thing as a prime contract. So the answer would be yes, because presumably, even though the new general contractor is assuming the the same work and overtaking that work, and basically doing the same stuff, they're going to have a new contract with the owner. And so you should go ahead and file just to be safe. But there's an argument to be made that you've already filed. So as a matter of practice, you should go ahead and file once the new general contractor is on the job. But if somehow it got missed, there's a potential argument to be made that you should be covered. So as a matter of practice, file when there's a new general contractor. That's what I tell clients to do. I'll give you an example. Ascent Construction's been in all sorts of problems here for the last couple of years, especially the last year. I had several clients who were doing work on Sugarmont, which is over in Sugar House, a mixed-use project. Each of the clients who continued to do work on that job, I told them to file a new notice in the state construction registry. They asked me if they should release their old one or withdraw their old one, and I said, no, just file a new one, and unless somebody insists, leave your old one in there. So that's the way I address those. All right. The next question, I presume that material suppliers have the same 2091-80 rules from the day materials are shipped. Yep, that is exactly right. So here's the thing to, let's see if I can, remember the 20 days is 20 days from your first work. I can find my spreadsheet. So the 2091-80, so for suppliers and subcontractors, your 20 days is based upon your first date of work. And so the 20 days will vary based upon each individual supplier and subcontractor. The deadlines, if you follow what I'm talking about here, then for suppliers and subs, it's the same thing, 90 days after your last work, and then 180 days after your claim is filed. So this is not subcontractor specific. It does apply to suppliers as well. And it's best if you start this 20-day clock from shipment. I think I would have to go double check it, but if I remember right, the law says that it's 20 days from physical commencement. And so as a matter of business policy, you should go 20 days after it. It leaves your warehouse or your yard, but I'm just looking here really quick to see. I think there is, it's the actual physical part. Here we go. A person who desires to claim a construction lien shall file a preliminary notice no later than 20 days after the day on which the person commences providing construction work on the real property. So from a supplier perspective, your standard policy should be we pre-lien within 20 days of when we ship. But if that gets missed by a couple days and it didn't show up until a little bit after you shipped, then you may have some room there. So that's what I would do. If anybody has any other questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, or if not, then like I said, I'm going to send this spreadsheet that I've been showing you, and I'm going to send my PowerPoint that explains everything that's here on the worksheet tab in a little bit more detail. I'm going to give those to Dave, and he'll send those out to everybody. And if you have any questions, there's contact information for me on the PowerPoint. You can feel free to give me a call, and we're happy to chat about that. The other thing that you can do is I have an assistant who does all of our lien filing and stuff like that. So there is a toll-free number that you can call, and she can answer a lot of these questions. So this is the website for the lien service. It's lienservices.construction, and on the contact menu here, this is the toll-free number, 855-797-2295. So my assistant Tracy answers that, and she knows everything that I explained tonight and quite a bit more. So she can answer a lot of your questions. If you have someone working for you that's trying to figure out how to find something in the registry, she's really good at doing that and taking care of all those sorts of things. So feel free to give her a call with any questions you've got. And if she can't answer them, she puts them into me and I take care of it. So that's everything I've got at this point, Dave.
Thank you, Dana, very much. As I mentioned, this was recorded, so I will send out a link so that you can review this again if you'd like, and so that and I will also include the attachments that Dana has spoken of. So thank you very much, Dana, and everybody who's participated on this. And we'll get your hour uploaded in the next few days. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you another time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Dave.